Story time about how my ex-boyfriend set my house on fire. Yeah, you know, every time that I think men can't get worse, they do. Okay, so a little background information. I was 16 and a sophomore in high school. So my whole life, I grew up in a very ran down trailer park. One of those ones where everybody knew everybody, and most of the people who lived there were white trash. Now, no, I'm not saying just because it was a trailer park, every person who lived there was white trash, okay? What I'm saying is that particular stereotype happens to be spot on for my neighborhood. You had the two neighbors that would argue every time they put their children on the bus. And then there were the little cliques, you know, like one group of moms that would talk shit on another group of moms. They would talk shit on their kids, their parenting styles, all of the above, which is ironic because all of them were terrible parents. You know, I know exactly what she's talking about because I just happen to live in one of these neighborhoods, and there was this one lady who would literally wake up at the ass crack of dawn, bring a lawn chair out, and like her trailer was like right on the corner. She would set her lawn chair on the corner at like 6 in the morning whenever kids are walking to the bus and stuff. She would yell. She would play music really loud just to start fights with people. And this went on till about like 7 o'clock at night, or until somebody called the cops on her. And you know, at first I found it very entertaining, but then whenever I would be playing with my sister in our yard and she would start screaming at us, I would go inside and pray that she would be arrested every day. Like, did anybody else have that neighbor? Like, do any of you have that one neighbor that's just like so out of pocket? Because I know some of you have to, and I'm curious to know. Anyway, so I'm not gonna lie, my neighborhood was actually really weird, like extremely weird. So even though we lived in a trailer park, it was actually really big. Like, it was big enough to the point where we had 3 school bus stops. We had 1 bus stop, you know, the ones that would take you all around town. Anyways, you guys get the point. It was big. And if you'd never lived in a trailer park before, there's usually only 1 bus stop for a whole trailer park if it's small enough, which most of them are. But like I said, pretty much everybody knew everybody, and growing up I had a small group of friends, and we were all friends with all of the older kids and all of the younger kids, and all of us would hang out together. Like, you could be 7 years old hanging out with an 18-year-old, not in a weird way, okay? Not in a weird way, and not one-on-one, okay? I just mean like in groups, okay? Like, for example, there was this park in our neighborhood that everybody would go to hang out at. Well, everybody in our neighborhood. And we would all play games together and stuff there too. Like, there was a group of elementary kids, there were kids in middle school, kids in high school, adults who graduated but still acted like teenagers. Now, this sounds like fun, right? Right? Yeah, think again. This led to some very weird and pervy shit going on in my neighborhood. Like, for example, some of the younger girls would date or inappropriately hang out with these older guys. And I mean younger and older, okay? And it wasn't even just like younger girls with older guys. It was younger guys, like boys hanging out with women. I'm talking 13 years old dating or hanging out with a 17-year-old, or a 15-year-old dating slash hanging out with a 23-year-old. Yeah, shit was really fucked up. But here's the thing, right? Nobody saw a freaking problem with this. Not one person. Because almost every single one of the parents slash adults that lived in the neighborhood were on drugs. Well, actually, that's not true. Some people did see an issue with it, but it was mainly the people who weren't on drugs, which, like I said, is not a lot of people. I mean, actually, there was this like one lady who was like very heavy on drugs, and she knew what was going on, but like at the same time, I think it was more of just her head making up things that were going on, which were actually going on, because she would always have signs outside of her house saying like, I live next to a rapist. And technically she did, because this guy was like 23, 24 maybe, with a 14-year-old. And also she would go around and like literally just knock on people's doors, handing out flyers and trying to make people sign petitions to kick certain people who she thought were like child molesters out of the neighborhood. Also, she would sit on her porch and she would scream things at these guys, saying that if they talked to her daughter, she would shoot them. I mean, period. So you know what? Like, she ain't wrong. She is not wrong, because listen to me. Half of these men here were weirdos. So sis, keep doing your thing. I was with it. I mean, she did end up getting evicted though because of the disturbances that she was causing, and a lot of people were saying that she made them feel unsafe. So yeah. Anyway, so back to the people who were sober, who knew about this, but there was nothing they could really do, because, you know, they would tell the parents. They would be like, hey, I don't know, Avery, who's 15, is hanging out with Michael, who is 27 years old. And all Avery would have to say is, Mom, I literally don't know what they're talking about. They're literally lying. And the reason why she would say something like that is because her daughter doesn't like me, and she doesn't like you because her daughter doesn't like me. They always talk shit on us, blah, 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 blah. Like, you can even ask Gabby and her mom. This lady tried saying the same exact shit about her. Now, that is a literal situation that I watched happen. I was over one of my friend's house, and, you know, one of the neighbors storms over there saying, hey, your daughter is hanging out with a 27-year-old. And I just straight up watched my friend lie to her mom's face. But this is what most of the kids would do. Like, Avery would say this knowing that her mom was so fucked up that she was gonna believe her instead of the other bitch. And now she was gonna have problems with her, so that way Avery wouldn't really have to worry about her mom believing anything this girl said anymore. Also, Avery's mom went to talk to Gabby's mom, and the whole conversation would be Gabby's mom saying, oh yeah, you know, she tried to say the same thing about Gabby. It's ridiculous what these women do nowadays. So much drama, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, long story short, Avery's mom pretty much looked at this lady and told her to fuck off, or she would beat the shit out of her. She's like, you need to mind your business, maybe take care of your own kids. So there was like an even weirder part about this. Half of these guys were on a registered sex offender list. What the fuck? That makes me kind of weirded out, because aren't like people who are on this list not allowed to live near parks or anything like that? Fuck. Anyways, the excuse that these people on these lists would use whenever, you know, it's brought up to them, they would be like, oh, well, I was going to the bathroom, you know, I was peeing behind a tree in a park and a police officer saw me, and then, you know, like this, that, and the next. And like, okay, I could see if it happened to one of you, maybe two, but the fact that all 20 of you are saying, like, sticking with that story, there's something wrong, extremely wrong with that. Anyway, so like I said, I grew up in this neighborhood my whole life, and my parents and I lived with my grandma. My grandma was an amazing person. She never did drugs. We didn't have a lot of money, and these trailers were super cheap and affordable for low income people. I would say that when my grandma was around, I had structure in my life. Like, she knew the bullshit that went around in this neighborhood, and she always made sure to keep me out of it. And we had a lot of government assistance, like food stamps. And since my grandma and my parents were unable to work, they would all get unemployment checks. And by unable to work, I did not mean my fucking grandma, because she actually couldn't work. I meant my parents. Because they were damn well capable of getting a fucking job. But you already know what my parents' money went towards. Drugs. Anyway, so because of how much government assistance we had, my grandma was able to get me into some after-school activities and some other programs that our church would pay for, because our church had this like program where if you were from a low income household, then some of the donations that they would get, they would put towards putting kids in sports activities, you know, paying for uniforms and shit like that, just all that stuff. So of course my grandma put me in all of these all of them that she could to keep me away from all the bullshit that was going around in our neighborhood. Because don't get me wrong, there were some kids in the neighborhood who were good, and mainly those were the ones who had sober parents. And because I wasn't involved in any of the bad activities that the other kids were involved in, and I mean the kids who had parents who were drug addicts, I would try to hang out with the good kids. Not saying that if your parents are drug addicts, you're not a good kid, okay? My mom was a drug addict. I think I turned out great, but that's because I had my dad, so. But to my grandma, you were going to end up just like your parents, especially if you did not have any other adult figures in your household to keep you on track and give you structure. But because the good kids' parents knew that my parents were on drugs, they wouldn't let their kids hang out with me. I wasn't invited to any of the sleepovers that these kids would have. And the thing is like, just because my parents were on drugs, they just assumed that my grandma was on them too. So I really had no friends except for the kids that I went to school with. And those were just school friends. You know, I wasn't going over to their houses. They weren't coming over to mine. And sadly, my grandma ended up passing away whenever I was around 8 years old. And after she passed away, it was pretty much all downhill from there. I couldn't be in any after school activities anymore, mainly because my parents forgot to fill out the forms. Also, I would have to be picked up after these after school activities, right? Just listen. And this school is literally 5 minutes away from my house. But of course, that was too much for my parents. That was way too much for them. Like, if my 65-year-old grandma can get her ass in her car and drive to the school every single day to come and pick me up, there should be no reason why anybody else can't. And it's not like my parents didn't have a car or anything like that. They had my grandma's car. And my parents, that's just like a whole other story that is not for this one, okay? Like, they didn't have jobs. We already knew that. All they did was stay at home, sleep, argue, and occasionally go missing for 3 days and then come back like nothing ever happened. Anyway, so fast forward a couple years, I'm starting to hang out with some of the other kids in the neighborhood, and it was definitely weird because we were like 9 or 10 years old hanging out with 14-year-olds who were smoking weed and drinking alcohol. But this wasn't weird for anybody else because almost every kid in the neighborhood started drinking and smoking around 11 years old. Like, I wish I was joking. I mean, honestly, it was really sad though, because somehow people would end up hearing about, you know, somebody's kid smoking and drinking at that age, and CPS would come, put them in foster care, and to us, they just fucking disappeared. So yeah, I'm 10 years old, hanging out with these 14-year-olds, and the friends that I made after my grandma passed away all started smoking weed and drinking, so I just decided to go along with it. Well, fast forward again, I'm 14 and now I am drinking and smoking every single day. Doesn't matter if I have school or not. I didn't give a fuck. And now I'm starting to hang out with the older kids. Not even kids, to be honest. They were grown ass adults. And I would say they were between the ages of 20 and 25. That sounds about right. But don't get me wrong. You would not think that these were grown men. You would literally think that these were teenage boys because they enjoyed lighting shit on fire. They would play video games all the time and skateboard off these DIY ramps and hurt themselves. Anyways, you guys get the point, okay?